Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English Insights. This is the place where you can practice your English while learning about important news from around the world. In today's video, we will talk about a series of special meetings that took place in August 2024. U.S. President Donald Trump met first with Russian President Vladimir Putin and later with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. These meetings were very important because they happened during the war between Russia and Ukraine, a conflict that affects not only Europe, but also food, energy, and security around the world. By following this story, you will understand why the world is closely watching these meetings and what they mean while improving your English listening skills. So, let's get started. Part 1. The first meeting, Trump and Putin on August 16th. On August 16th, President Donald Trump met with President Vladimir Putin. This was a very important event because it was the first time the two leaders talked directly about the war in Ukraine. The meeting took place in the United States, and it was kept very private. Only a few close advisors were allowed in the room, and the two presidents spent 5 hours speaking face to face. The meeting was seen as a possible turning point. For a long time, Russia and the United States had been on opposite sides. Russia was leading a war in Ukraine, while the U.S. was one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine. Having Trump and Putin in the same room created hope that new talks could begin. During the meeting, the two men discussed peace and security. Trump asked Putin if Russia was ready to think about a way to stop the fighting. He said that ending the war could help both Ukraine and the whole world. Putin listened carefully and answered in a calm but firm way. He explained Russia's position and repeated that his country had its own needs for safety and influence. Trump also spoke about America's role. He reminded Putin that the U.S. had given Ukraine support in weapons and training. But he added, Washington was also open to trying new paths if Russia showed real interest in peace. This signaled that America wanted results, not just promises. Even though no official agreement came out of the August 16th meeting, the fact that the two leaders spoke openly was already seen as important. Both sides understood the big differences, but they also saw a direct channel was now open, and this could lead to more serious talks later. Observers described the meeting as cautious but hopeful. It was cautious because neither leader wanted to give up much at the start. It was hopeful because simply talking was better than silence. For many, the meeting showed that the door to peace was not fully closed. Part 2. Trump, Zelensky, meeting on August 18th. Only 2 days after meeting with Vladimir Putin, President Trump welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington. This second meeting was just as important as the first one, but in a very different way. If the talk with Putin was about exploring Russia's ideas, The meeting with Zelensky was about listening to Ukraine's hopes and fears. The meeting took place in the White House. Cameras captured the warm handshake between the two leaders. Reporters shouted questions, but both men smiled and said they would speak in detail behind closed doors. After a short greeting in front of the press, they sat down with their teams for long and serious talks. President Zelensky came to Washington with clear goals. He wanted to make sure the U.S. would continue to support Ukraine strongly. For years, Ukraine had relied on American weapons, money, and political backing. Zelensky reminded Trump that this help was not only about Ukraine, but about the safety of Europe as a whole. He explained, if Russia was not stopped, other countries could be in danger too. Trump listened carefully. He repeated that peace was his main target. He said he wanted to end the war quickly, but he also explained that any deal had to be realistic. Trump told Zelensky he would continue to support Ukraine, but also hoped Ukraine could show some flexibility in talks with Russia. This was not easy for Zelensky to hear. For Ukrainians, flexibility often meant giving up land or rights, something they deeply resisted. The talks went on for hours. The two leaders discussed the human cost of the war. Zelensky spoke about families who had lost their homes, children who could not go to school, and soldiers who had died defending their country. He made it clear that Ukraine was ready for peace, but only if it came with justice. Trump shared his own view. He said that endless war was hurting not only Ukraine and Russia, but also the world. Food prices, energy markets, and global trade were all affected. He explained that peace would help everyone, not just the countries directly involved. When the meeting ended, both presidents made short statements to the press. Trump said the talks had been very good and that progress was possible. Zelensky thanked the U.S. for its support and said he believed his country's voice had been heard. However, he also repeated, Ukraine would not accept any deal that ignored its sovereignty. Around the world, analysts paid close attention to this second meeting. For many, it showed the real challenge of Trump's peace plan. On one side was Russia, powerful and demanding. On the other was Ukraine, determined and unwilling to lose its independence. Trump had placed himself in the middle, trying to bridge the gap. In the days after August 18th, people debated what the future would bring. Some thought Trump's efforts could really open the way for peace. Others feared that pushing Ukraine toward compromise would only make the situation worse. Whatever the truth, the meeting with Zelensky proved one thing: Ukraine's voice was central to any plan, and the world could not ignore it. Part 3. Ukraine's Perspective and Actions. For Ukraine, the August meetings were both hopeful and worrying. On one hand, the country's leaders wanted peace because the war had already brought so much pain. On the other hand, they were afraid talks between the U.S. and Russia might happen without giving Ukraine enough influence. This was a fear that Kiev had carried for a long time. President Zelensky and his government repeated many times that Ukraine must be part of any decision about its future. They explained no agreement would work if it was made only between larger powers. Ukrainians had fought hard to defend their country, and they wanted to decide for themselves what peace would look like. During the August 18th meeting with Trump, Zelensky gave a strong message. Ukraine welcomed American help, but would not accept a deal that traded land for peace. He said clearly that Ukraine's borders, recognized by the world before the war, could not be changed by force. For many Ukrainians, giving up territory would mean dishonor to soldiers who had already sacrificed their lives. At the same time, Zelensky showed understanding of the global situation. He knew that the war was not only about Ukraine, but also about food, energy, and security in many other regions. In his speeches, he reminded Trump and other leaders that supporting Ukraine was also protecting the international order. If Russia could take land by violence, he argued, then no country in the world would feel safe. Inside Ukraine, public opinion was strong. Families who had lost loved ones were against any deal that looked like surrender. Civil society groups, journalists, and ordinary citizens used social media to express their views. While most people wanted peace, they also demanded justice. They wanted the return of captured land, the safe return of displaced families, and punishment for crimes committed during the war. Ukraine also took active steps on this battlefield during this period. Even while political talks were happening abroad, Ukrainian forces continued to defend their positions and push back when possible. This was important for two reasons. First, it kept morale high inside the country. Second, it showed the world that Ukraine was not only waiting for others to decide its fate, it was still fighting and controlling its future. Internationally, Zelensky worked to keep strong ties with Europe. He spoke with leaders in France, Germany, and Poland, making sure they remained committed to Ukraine's cause. He wanted to avoid a situation where the US and Russia made a deal and Europe simply followed. For Ukraine, keeping Western unity was as important as the talks in Washington. In the end, Ukraine's actions in August showed both strength and caution. The government welcomed peace talks, but set clear lines that could not be crossed. The people's voice was strong, demanding that any agreement respect the country's independence and dignity. For the world, this made one thing clear: no lasting peace could be built without Ukraine at the center of the process. Part 4. Russia's position and calculations. From Russia's side, the August meetings were a chance to show power, but also to explore possible new openings. President Vladimir Putin came to the table with clear goals. He wanted the world to see Russia as strong, not weak, even after long months of war. At the same time, he knew that the cost of fighting was heavy. and that diplomacy could bring advantages when war could not. In his talks with Trump on August 16th, Putin repeated the main ideas Russia had said many times before. He argued that Russia was defending its security. In his view, NATO had moved too close to Russian borders, and Ukraine was becoming a tool for the West. For Putin, the war was not just about land, but about influence. He wanted to make sure Russia's voice was respected in Europe and in the world. Still, the war had created big problems inside Russia. The economy suffered because of international sanctions. Many Russian businesses lost access to Western markets, and ordinary people felt pressure in their daily lives. Even if the government controlled the media, people knew the war was costly. Putin understood that peace talks could help reduce this pressure. At the same time, Russia did not want to look desperate. This is why Putin's words were careful. He did not promise to stop the war, but he also did not close the door to future talks. For him, the main point was to show that Russia was ready to listen, but only if its own interests were respected. Putin also saw the meetings as a test. He wanted to know how far Trump was willing to go, and whether the U.S. would push Ukraine to compromise. If Washington showed signs of flexibility, Russia could use that as a chance to gain something without giving up too much. For example, Putin might ask for recognition of control over some areas, or a limit on NATO's future presence in Ukraine. On the military side, Russia continued to act as if it had the upper hand. Russian forces kept fighting, even while talks were happening. This was meant to send a message: Russia was strong and would not negotiate from weakness. At the same time, diplomats in Moscow repeated that Russia was open to serious proposals. Internationally, Russia hoped the meetings would create doubts among Ukraine's allies. If Europe or the U.S. started to think about compromise, Russia could benefit. Putin understood that Western unity was one of Ukraine's biggest strengths. Breaking that unity was as important as success on the battlefield. In short, Russia's position in August was complex. Putin wanted peace if it gave Russia respect and security guarantees, but he did not want to appear weak. He balanced between showing power and leaving room for diplomacy. For him, the talks were not about ending the war quickly, but about shaping the future balance of power. Part 5: International Reactions and Global Impact. The August meetings between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky did not happen in isolation. Around the world, governments, media, and ordinary people paid close attention. The talks were about more than just Ukraine. They touched on energy, food, and the future of global security. In Europe, leaders reacted with mixed feelings. On one hand, they welcomed the idea of peace talks. After more than a year of war, European countries were under pressure. Energy prices had gone up, Refugees had crossed borders, and businesses faced economic losses. Any step toward peace seemed positive. On the other hand, European leaders were worried about being left out. If the US and Russia made a deal without Europe's input, the continent's security could be shaped by others. This fear made many governments cautious. Germany and France, in particular, spoke about the importance of keeping Ukraine at the center of any decision. They said openly that no country should decide Ukraine's future without Ukraine itself. At the same time, they tried to show support for Trump's efforts, not wanting to break unity with the United States. In Eastern Europe, the reaction was sharper. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states had lived under Russian influence in the past. They were afraid that a quick deal might allow Russia to keep control over parts of Ukraine. For them, a bad peace was worse than no peace at all. These countries spoke loudly in support of Ukraine's independence and warned against any deal that rewarded aggression. Beyond Europe, other regions also watched closely. In the Middle East and Africa, the war had caused shortages of grain, leading to higher food prices. For many families, this was a daily struggle. Governments in these regions hoped the meetings could bring stability to food supply chains. In Asia, reactions were more complex. China stayed mostly quiet in public, but followed the talks carefully. For Beijing, the outcome could change the global balance of power. A strong Russia aligned with China was one scenario. A weaker Russia forced into peace was another. Both outcomes would affect China's strategy. The United Nations also made a statement. Its leaders said they supported all efforts toward peace, but reminded the world that any solution must respect international law. This meant Ukraine's borders and rights should not be ignored. For ordinary people around the world, the news brought a mix of hope and doubt. Some saw Trump's diplomacy as a real chance to end suffering. Others worried that quick deals between big powers often forgot the voices of smaller nations and citizens. In the end, the global reaction showed how connected the war had become. What started as a conflict between two neighbors now affected food on dinner tables in Africa, gas bills in Europe, and political debates in Asia. The August meetings made clear that peace in Ukraine was not just a local issue, it was a global need. Part 6. The Trilateral Meeting Idea and its Challenges. After the separate meetings between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, many experts began to talk about a possible trilateral meeting. This meant a direct talk, where the three leaders would sit at the same table. The idea sounded simple, but was full of difficulties. For Trump, a trilateral meeting would be a big chance to show his skill as a deal-maker. If he could bring Russia and Ukraine together, it would look like a major success for his leadership. He wanted the world to see that he could solve a war that had lasted for so long. But arranging such a meeting was not easy. For Ukraine, the risk was very high. Zelensky worried that being in the same room as Putin might make it seem like Ukraine was forced to accept Russia's conditions. Many Ukrainians were against the idea of sitting down with a leader they blamed for war crimes. Zelensky knew that, if he agreed too quickly, he could lose the trust of his people. For Russia, the meeting was useful, but also dangerous. Putin wanted to show the world that he was still treated as an equal by the United States, but he also feared being cornered. If Trump and Zelensky stood together against him during talks, Russia could look weak. On top of this, the world's media would watch every moment of such a meeting. A single handshake, a smile, or a wrong word could be used to judge who was winning and who was losing. This made all sides careful. In short, while the Trilateral meeting sounded like a good step toward peace, the political risks were very high. Each leader had to think not only about the war, but also about how their people, their allies, and the world would see them. That is why, even though the idea was discussed, it remained uncertain whether such a meeting would really take place. Thank you so much for watching until the end of this video. Don't forget to share your opinion about these two meetings and their impact on the future of the war in the comments below.